Hi again from Ann Holmes. We're proceeding with Happy in the Mountains. We're going to talk about the stitching and quilting today. We've experimented with our short sides, but I wanted to show you a few things first. When I first started this technique, no sewing until you quilted, I would put a few things down on my French Fuse foundation and then take them to the sewing machine and stitch them. But year 2005, I can't remember what date exactly, for our quilt show, there was no way I was going to be able to finish this quilt by stitching the top first and then putting the sandwich together and stitching it all again. And I thought, well, why am I stitching it twice? So this was the first quilt, Rainbow Falls, that I stitched completely with no sewing in it until after I had the sandwich made. And I'm not an experienced machine quilter, but I'm using invisible thread on top, and I used an ugly back this time, so I didn't have to worry about my stitches showed in the back. So you can always use a heavily patterned back so that you won't worry about what your individual stitching looks like. The invisible thread just adds a nice texture. First, you have to outline stitch everything, and when I did this, I was very methodical. I just started at the top, outline stitching the shapes, and then instead of outlining everything, I just went ahead and started filling in, mostly with echo quilting or some kind of texture. But this was the very first quilt that I did with this technique. It was a stained glass design that I had made in stained glass before I turned it into a quilt. This is Cygnus, a quilt that we just finished recently. There's a lot of pattern, a lot of movement going on the front of the quilt. And we simply outline stitched every shape, and then you can see the texture. I used a thread that pretty much matches the back. So by just outline stitching and echoing the shape, you know, I think it turned out quite nicely. All right, this is one of the short sides of Happy in the Mountains. We warmed up on this one. Now we're ready to do the long sides, but I can demonstrate on the long side what we did. So you don't notice very much a design on the front. Why I use invisible thread? Why add another design element to this? Because it already has so much pattern in the fabric. So the only time you really notice the design is on the back. And we went bold this time. I usually match the thread to the backing, but we decided this time to make the star elements a darker color so it would show up. So when I started this, I didn't know exactly what design I wanted to do, other than I knew I needed to outline stitch everything. So I just took a big piece of clear plastic and did some shapes, and with this fabric, I love this wiggle design. I thought, well, that's an easy place to start. So we just use those lines in the fabric itself to do this. And I usually do a lot of echo quilting, and that's great for these shorter pieces, but these really long angles, that was just going to be too much going back and forth, and how boring. So we decided to do some feathers there, and we have a guest artist today that's going to show you how we did those feathers. And then with the feathers, we thought this round shape, but just it helps you get an idea of what you want to do by just taking a magic marker and tracing over the pattern shapes. I didn't want so many points coming to one place on this. It's already going to be stitched all around each individual shape. So I just put a quarter there and drew that, and I decided to just echo that shape for the head, and then I could stop all these things there, so to keep the center free. Hi, we have a guest artist today, my friend Hazel Shaw. She's going to show us how she does her feathers.
Okay, so we're just going to do some feathers here, and we're going to follow the line that we've already done the zigzag on, which is right here, and that'll be the spine of the feathers. So what I do is I just start here with your straight stitch, and you just make a nice loop out this way and come back in. You always want to return to the spine, which is that zigzag line. So then again, you take one on this side, back to the spine, and over to this one. And you want to try not to re-stitch on the outer part of the feather. So as you come back, you follow the line back to where you started, back to the spine, and then over again like this, back on the one you've already stitched, and then up to the spine again and back. So your outer part of your feather here is never re-stitched. It just makes a neater feather when you're all finished with it. And just come back to the spine, back like this. And you could probably mark this on your quilt if you wanted to with a erasable pen if you wanted to do that, but it's very easy just to follow the spine like this. You're going to be following all those up there like this. When you get up here at the top, I'll just do one here like this and show you, because you want to make a little, like a finishing feather, little loop there, and then one there, and back to the spine, and then you would stop. Okay, on these two areas here, you're again going to use this as your spine, but one is narrower than the other one, but you just use the same method where you start at the spine and make your smaller loop on this side, and then go over here in a nice kind of a flowy loop on this one, and then you just go back here. It's the same method as you did on the ones that were more evenly spaced, but you just continue with your feather up like this, back to the spine and around. Now when you get to the end here, you're going to have a much wider area. So let me just show you from like here. Here's your feather. Then go up like this, back to the spine. And then here's that loop like I mentioned before. You go up to the top, so that'll be more of a finished area, like so. Now when I start on this one here and get up to the top, then my finished area is like this. There's a loop here, and you redraw back onto your spine. And this one, I just followed it up this way to finish it and back to the spine. Okay, we're going to sew the long part of the quilt now. We're going to do some feathers. What I like to use are these little kitchen gloves that you wash dishes with, and just cut the fingers out, and that helps you guide your fabric without having to wear the full gloves. So I'm starting at this basting line, and you don't want to stitch on this side of it because that's where we're going to attach it at a later time. So we start right here, and again, this is the spine of the feather. This zigzag line will be the spine. So you just start with a loop this way and then continue on this side up the spine. This is how it'll look on the back. As you see, I just stayed on the spine as much as I could and went out and made a feather and back and around. That makes a pretty pattern on the back.